And if someone can find someone that unequivocally was involved with it, I'll kill him myself.
Folks, I'm back with Jake Spann Golf, and it seems like a natural continuation of our last video. Now we actually have Jimmy Dunne's plan.
How big of an issue is it where the money is coming from?
It's not an issue for me because I don't work for the Saudi Arabian government.
We questioned the background story that we've been given in the last episode, but now we got details as to the plan. Let's go through this plan together, and also we have a lot more details about who Jimmy Dunne is himself.
The man, the myth, the meth, the legend.
That's awesome. So there's this ESPN article that just came out titled Jimmy Dunne outlines plan for PGA Tour loyalists, LIV players who want back. I was up on Twitter this AM and I saw something about the PGA Tour players that had remained loyal would get equity in this whole new company.
Correct. This was kind of a random thing that popped up as like a way to appease the Chesson Hadleys of the world who were...
Anyway, I would like to be rewarded for some loyalty.
Going in the press conferences saying, hey, what's going on? Like, I mean, the LIV guys made their choice, but I stayed loyal. Where are you going to... You're going to give me my salad?
I think his quote was something along the lines of, I would like some money for being loyal.
Basically, that was the appropriate way of saying it.
So essentially, golfers who remain loyal to the PGA Tour, but not those who left for the LIV Golf League, would receive equity shares in the new for-profit enterprise being formed by the PGA Tour, DP World Tour, and Saudi Arabia's public investment fund, Jimmy Dunne told ESPN on Friday. This situation, if anything, to me, raises more questions as how do you divide up the equity between, let's say, the top 10, 15, 20 players and the Chesson Hadleys of the world who are in the mid 200s?
You know, this conversation that they're talking about makes it sound like the PGA Tour is going to end up becoming some type of like publicly traded company, because otherwise you have to basically do it like that, because there's honestly going to be no way to really divvy up equity in a percentage-wise base that will make sense for players like Chesson Hadley, who's ranked 270th in the world. Not dissing on Chesson Hadley, but I'm saying, you know, how do you get a percentage of a percentage correct absent the dispersal of stock or equity, like actual formal shares? So this could be a sign that PGA Tour's new entity is going to become a publicly traded company. What's
also interesting is, let's say you get your tour card. Are you getting shares as you get the card?
That's a good question. That's a very good question. Like 1 year on tour equals 25 shares of PGA stock. Is that what goes on now?
To further our point, the article continues that the current tour members would receive equity in the new company based on a yet to be determined formula. This thing is going to open up a whole new can of worms, because now you could also say, hey, if you're giving me equity shares based on the OWGR and these guys are unhappy with their shares, maybe they also bring into question the OWGR.
I'm imagining right now the scenario in the Office where Jim tries to figure out how to dispersal raises, and so he does it with putting beans on the pictures of the people's faces, and everyone finds out and freaks out.
And the elephant in the room also is you've got guys like Hideki Matsuyama, Patrick Cantley, John Rahm, and Cameron Young. They turned down a lot of money.
But it probably is an issue for players that chose to go and take that money.
And now what do you say? Hey, we'll give you a few more shares. And you're saying, hey, dude, I turned down 100 million, a 200 million, whatever contract. This doesn't work out for me.
Yeah. It's going to be very difficult to find a way to actually give them the correct equity. And you can say, well, you know, what about the PIP money, the player improvement money? That's an estranged and funky scenario and formula that doesn't actually give the correct amount to the players at the point in time, because it's based on how much did you move the needle. So it's really just how popular you are, which if that's the case, Ricky Fowler could miss a cut for the next 4 years and still get 25% of the PIP money.
Just to add on to how poor the PGA Tour is able to calculate these things, think about how many times the rules change for the FedEx Cup.
Oh, absolutely. Every single year they change it. I mean, they changed it last year to where it was You weren't. It wasn't just the points that you had to be on there for. They actually had to change the rules in order to make sure the live players couldn't show up to the events. So yeah, they always are changing around things. They're saying, hey, we're going to make the fall schedule not worth this. We're going to make the majors worth more. We're going to make the players worth less. We're going to make the Memorial actually elevated this year. So you're right. There is no set formula that goes forward that is truly fair. What if you're somebody who's a 265 hitter, a great player, and then all of a sudden they say, hey, Memorial's worth 5 times the points, but Memorial's a 7,500-yard course. Is that fair to you?
Just look into how often they tweak the OWGR, and then you have the Asian Tour or the European Tour saying, now DP World Tour, now potentially LIV PGA Tour, same company tour. I don't even know how to refer to it anymore. They're all under the same umbrella. But imagine the outcry that goes on forward now because, even with anything they put their fingers, they try to do the rollback. They can never get agreement on anything. And now they're going to try to get these proper valuations. Let me read Jimmy Dunne's quote here that says, there would have to be some kind of formulaic decision on how to do that. It would be a process to determine what would be a fair mechanism that would be really beneficial to our players. It's not happening.
It's not happening. It doesn't matter how they do this. Whoever is involved in deciding this gets fired. I mean, because there's no way anyone who likes this. This is literally the scenario I talked about earlier from The Office, where it's just, hey, man, this ain't going to work out for you. This is not good. I just don't see this being a win for anybody.
Also, as we had pointed out in the last video, PGA Tour Commissioner Jay Monahan would have oversight of the LIV Golf League, giving him the authority to determine whether the breakaway circuit will continue beyond this season.
I think you have to ask yourself the question, Jim, why? Why is this group spending so much money, billions of dollars, recruiting players and chasing a concept with no possibility of a return?
What's interesting about that is I thought yesterday or so we saw that LIV was going to continuing on, and now you have this again directly conflicting.
Yeah. And again, we're seeing this from another major media outlet saying that, hey, we have the opportunity to throw away LIV if we don't like where LIV's going, which they don't, because obviously it's stealing some of their thunder. And so what happens now? What happens now? This makes no sense again. And just to see another major media outlet posting this just shocks.
Here's something that the LIV players should consider now, apparently. If LIV folds, a committee that includes current PGA Tour members and administrators would determine potential punishment for players who left for it, but want to apply for reinstatement to the PGA Tour. Now, these same players right now are up in arms about how the PGA Tour told them not to take the money and has basically deceived them at every point, co-opting the 9/11 families and using the sports washing and blood money narratives.
As it relates to the families of 9/11, I have 2 families that are close to me that lost loved ones. And so my heart goes out to them. And I would ask, any player that has left or any player that would ever consider leaving, have you ever had to apologize for being a member of the PGA Tour?
Are they going to try to essentially redirect the PGA Tour players' outrage and anger at these LIV golfers?
And they may just do that simply because Jay Monahan's putting himself in a position where it's like, I'm untouchable. So you got this wound up punch that you got to throw. You got to throw this punch because it's ready to throw it. So instead of going at Jay Monahan, we're going to throw it left and hook Bryson DeChambeau in the throat. And I mean, this could be what happens where we see, I don't see certain players being really doled out harsh punishments. The ones that were super quiet, didn't really say much, yada, yada. But I could definitely see Matty Fitzpatrick, McIlroy, if those guys are on that board, if we see guys that are really not happy or have expressed severe hate in the past, what happens if McIlroy's on that committee and he has to sit there and preside over Patrick Reed? That feels like a conflict of interest. I don't think that's actually fair. If, of course, LIV disbands and they have to go back to the PGA Tour. You know what I'm saying?
Dude, that was awesome. Let's continue. Now, we've got information about Dunne here that says he's the vice chair and senior managing principal of the investment bank Piper Sandler. I'll probably Google later Piper Sandler scandal and really try to look into that a little bit. Because when I looked into the backgrounds, for example, of Seth Waugh, Deutsche Bank, and the head of RNA, Martin Slumbers, also Deutsche Bank, and when they were there at Deutsche Bank, all the billions that they were fined, I mean, Deutsche Bank was fined. Really? I'm going to look into this later. This might be another episode.
It's amazing how many of these investment funds you don't hear about until you hear about, you know? They don't exist until they exist.
100%. Now, also about Jimmy Dunne.
And there's really very little after my faith, my family, my friends, and my health that is ahead of that. The game of golf is right there.
He's a member of Augusta National Golf Club. So there's a connection between him and Fred Ridley. And remember, Fred Ridley was grilled by Christine Brennan about the whole Saudi Arabia money back at the Masters this year. And he's also the president of Seminole Golf Club in Juno Beach, Florida. And didn't he ban a golfer, a LIV golfer?
Well, he banned several from not. So if you guys don't remember, early part of this year, Seminole Golf Club has a big giant pro-am. It's one of those that's littered with PGA Tour pros. Honestly, the joke was the week this pro-am actually happened, that it deserved the most OWGR points for that weekend simply because it had the best field by far. I mean, we're talking like pretty much 1 through 40 of the OWGR is usually present there almost. And it was crazy because no LIV golfers were there, even though it's not tour based, not concentric with anything. If Jimmy Dunne really is who he says he is, then it makes a lot more sense, simply because that event is huge. We're talking everyone from the top 40 is pretty much there, except for the LIV players. So again, makes more sense why the LIV players weren't allowed to be there. We're starting to see a few more pieces of this puzzle about who Jimmy Dunne is and why he's actually influential coming to surface. Still doesn't make any sense, but it's making more sense than it did a few months ago or a few hours ago.
And as I said at the beginning of the discussion, the time to meet was the time when we could walk away at any point in time.
Here's a great quote in this article. They asked Fitzpatrick and DeChambeau if they feel bad for the guys who were offered money and didn't take the money. And DeChambeau says, I do feel bad for the PGA Tour players because they were told one thing and something else happened. On our side, we were told one thing and it's come to fruition. And to me, if your side is telling you one thing and it's coming to fruition and the other side is telling you stuff that isn't coming to fruition, do you still believe the other side, which is Jimmy Dunne?
Right. And, the PGA Tour players were left in the dark completely. LIV was told from the very get-go, this is what's going to happen. We're going to actually make this attempt. And it's going to be bumpy. It's going to be a nasty road. We're paying you big money because of the risk that you're taking, because of the opportunity that you're taking, because we know that you're going to experience toxicity. We know this. We're aware of this. Are you ready to get on board and saddle up and ride? Whereas the PGA Tour players were said, no, just sit here and behave yourself, and maybe we'll defeat these guys in a year or so because we have the moral high ground. And you're right. Fitzpatrick and all these other guys have every reason to be pissed off and not trustworthy of the other guys.
Was that a falsetto, Bill Murray?
I was trying my best, but I'm not Groundhog Day.
Let's continue. Monahan said he would wait until LIV Golf League's season ends in November to evaluate whether the team-focused circus had a place in golf's new global ecosystem. That's weird because you actually do have a lot of fans, including myself and yourself, who actually love LIV and love the format.
Not only that, but LIV has an opportunity that the PGA Tour never had, which is merchandise. Seriously, think about this. NFL, NBA, NHL, MLB, MLS. Does anybody buy any merchandise featuring the league itself? No. You don't see people wearing NFL hats, except for Rob Lowe at the Super Bowl.
I was going to say that, and that caused a stir. It was such an anomaly.
It was such an anomaly. But people buy their team equipment, their team apparel. They want to rep their team. People have their entire personality be the Cowboys, even though the Cowboys suck. People have their entire personality be the Green Bay Packers. It's just one of those things, man, where your NFL team becomes your personality. LIV Golf has this opportunity that the PGA Tour never had, never would have, never could have. So you can't tell me that LIV Golf is a circus and not actually viable long term, because the merchandise, which if we know this from the band Kiss, merchandise tops the ability of your music to sell. If you have better merch, you win. And LIV has better merch options than the PGA Tour.
Are you intentionally trying to alienate Big Boy Pants Golf current subscribers and potentially future Kiss loving subscribers?
No. I do love the band Kiss, okay? I was made for loving you, baby.
This part is classic. Monahan said, but what is in place is a commitment to make a good faith effort to look at team golf and the role it can play going forward. Has Jay Monahan done anything in good faith? Because as we see, this dude will go to any lengths to get the bag or keep himself in a position of power.
No, he hasn't done anything other than just secure his own longevity. And right now, all he is doing, to reference Kiss again, is licking it up, those PIF fund dollars that are potentially available for him right there.
This is the most insane Jimmy Dunne comment so far. I think we would form a panel, including tour players, that would evaluate what the terms would be. Remember, they're coming back to compete on the tour, so they have to be confident that they would be good enough to continue to play, and they would have to be willing to incur the penalty for having gone. Brooks Koepka just won the PGA Championship. You had 4 players in the top 10 at the Masters, and Jimmy Dunne says, remember, they're coming back to compete on the tour, so they have to be confident that they would be good enough to continue to play. Shouldn't he be directing this at Billy Horschel?
Yeah, seriously. Shouldn't he be directing this at his own players? Hey, man, there's only been 2 times in the last year where we've really seen, in the last, this calendar year, we've seen LIV golf players tee it up alongside PGA Tour players. And both times the PGA Tour has looked pretty wanting, especially considering that the LIV golf players have only had certain members of their roster and not necessarily the most informed players present. Think about this. How much worse would it have looked for the PGA Tour if they had given Charles Howell and Peter Uihlein the nod to the Masters? Those guys were in form, in season, and they were about ready to commit some serious treason on that course.
And on top of that, even Golf Digest now is turning on that narrative that the LIV golfers are weaker in the majors, because it just put out an article titled, Does LIV Schedule Better Prepare Its Players for Majors? It says, so far it would to be the case. It's missing the word appear. Someone needs a new editor at Golf Digest. But yeah, it says, so far it would appear to be the case.
Yeah. And that's the truth. I mean, so think about this. The LIV schedule takes you to places that you normally haven't been. You have fans that are happy and appreciative of you, cheering the entire time. So you have energy, you have noise, you have appreciation. When you're at a LIV event for a player, I'm sure you feel, even if you're not the big name player, you feel like a big name player right now. Pat Perez feels more like a celebrity now than he ever has in his entire career. That's a huge boost to your soul, huge boost to your mental ego, to your mental confidence. When these guys are going elsewhere to play, not only have they played less rounds, which means that their bodies aren't as worn down, which, let's be real, it's not a big deal for the 22-year-olds, except for the Will Zalatoris people that are swinging out of their shoes. But it's a huge deal to like the 40-year-olds who have the mental game to win championships, but may not have the body to withstand an entire season. So we're seeing players like Schwartzel, Oosthuizen, Mickelson getting the opportunity to be in their best body when they go to an event. They're feeling confident because they've been being cheered for rather than being booed or rather than being ignored completely. Because let's be real, if you play a bad round at a PGA event, guess what? On the weekend, you're teeing off at 7:01 p.m. to only your coaches and your wife.
We are getting all these details coming from Jimmy Dunne about what the potential future is of this whole new golf entity. But folks, who is Jimmy Dunne? Now, this is from a Palm Beach Post article that says, get to know North Palm Beach's Jimmy Dunne, the man behind the PGA Tour LIV golf merger. Rory would object to that. He would say PGA Tour PIF, because he hates when people say it's the PGA Tour and LIV merging. Jimmy Dunne, the man PGA Tour Commissioner Jay Monahan credits for sealing the deal that led to the Tour and LIV Golf uniting, is a power broker in the financial world with deep personal convictions to 9/11. Every time they bring this guy up now, within the first 4 sentences, they're going to mention 9/11. The North Palm Beach resident and president of Seminole Golf Club, who joined the PGA Tour's policy board last year, I believe it was November, has advised in some of the financial industry's largest mergers. The key issues that Dunne and obviously Jay Monahan stress now is the difference is confidentiality and speed are the two most critical things in getting a great deal done, Dunne told the Palm Beach Post. We are able to act with incredible speed and complete confidentiality, which is highly unusual, especially to me, when you answer to a PGA Tour board.
In those opportunities, the tour will always maintain control, 100%.
And you have a players' members board, and apparently you make these deals without
consulting anybody. Yeah. More than that, I mean, is this guy trying to pitch a new book, The Art of the Deal 2.0? Is that what he's trying to do? Is he trying to become the new Trump behind the scenes? What's going on right here?
I have no idea, but we're going to document this now because the story is going to change. Facts are going to come out that are going to conflict with this, just like the narratives have always been conflicting with the PGA Tour. And 1 minute they were saying that Jay Monahan was saying that LIV is an irrational threat. And now that irrational threat is the way to fund the PGA Tour's future. However, that confidentiality led to misunderstandings, misinterpretations, and a lack of understanding of where the PGA Tour was and what this offer would enable them to get to. That strikes me as odd because didn't the PGA Tour just boast about having all this money to fund the designated events last year?
It's strange. It really is, because they pulled it from their surplus funds, which why does a 501c have a surplus fund? Why does a nonprofit have a surplus fund? How do you work that into the equation? But, you know, this guy, if you remember correctly, from a previous article and previous video we talked about, wasn't he talking about how his ties to 9/11 were so special because he would have been in the tower if he hadn't been out qualifying for the mid-amateur that morning? Which,
yes, I've seen other titles of articles or headlines that golf literally saved his life.
To me, in life, there are no coincidences, but when too many things line up, it's just weird. And that's weird to me.
So now Dunne explains that he had two options when it came to the tour being funded by the kingdom's sovereign wealth fund: continue to battle legally and indefinitely against a very deep-pocketed competitor, formerly an irrational threat, or we could meet with the principal and find out that a lot of the things we want to do were extremely similar. And this is what Greg Norman had said back when it first started in February. Why don't we meet and discuss? And remember, and then Jay Monahan didn't want to meet with them.
Yeah. I mean, it was almost like at that point in time, Jay Monahan and others involved with it were just like, they don't want to be associated with being a part of a peacemaking offer that they didn't initiate based on how things are going now. It just seems like they wanted to be in control of the situation, or appear to be in control of the situation, and not give any credit to the great unifier, Greg Norman.
So then he says that basically they were going to end the litigation and the burdens and legal expense, create a pathway for their players to come back to the tour under the standards that our players set, and then start a new vehicle where, as commercial opportunities rise, the tour would have the wherewithal to underwrite them in a vehicle they would control. So now, obviously, we discussed that already in terms of the players that remain loyal would get equity. And then we also discussed that that equity might not be enough to compensate players that turn down $100 million offers. But what's also odd to me is, what if the LIV players don't want to abide by these terms?
Yeah. I mean, at this point, real talk, the LIV players have either made enough money or created their brand far enough to where I wouldn't be surprised if Jay Monahan says, hey, we're going to fold LIV immediately, then the players that are on LIV, some of them at least, say, hey, we don't want to do that. We're going to go make our own league that you don't control. And they could do that. You know, Bryson DeChambeau did that with the Pro Long Drive. He saved Pro Long Drive, became a principal investor in that. And, you know, it might not be as glamorous or as beautiful as LIV is, but I could see them doing that because guess what? LIV is way more fun than the PGA Tour.
They had a conversation that allowed the two sides to have a discussion about how we work together to grow the game, how we work together to grow the PGA Tour, and to really get an understanding and start building some trust as we pursued that. Monahan said, start building some trust. Does anyone trust Jay Monahan? He keeps throwing these words out that it's basically upside down world.
Yeah.
Given the PGA Tour's rhetoric and how much of a flashpoint topic this was over the past year, and what Commissioner Jay Monahan said at this very tournament last year at the RBC Canadian Open, the 9/11 Families Group has been very critical of this move.
The only thing that I trust about Jay Monahan is that this guy could be a great senator because he has no real moral high ground. This dude is as slippery as an eel and as deadly as a pit viper. This guy is a senator in the making.
So it's actually this article that says golf saved his life on 9/11, and that gets into that whole thing of him playing golf on the day he should have been in the towers.
Yes.
And then, of course, you have Bob Ford, the former head PGA professional at Seminole Golf Club, saying he's one of the great Americans in our country. All the incredible things he did with 9/11 and with the families. He's an incredible leader. Jimmy is all business, and it's for the good of the game. Nobody loves the game more than Jimmy Dunne, and I know he'll do the right thing for the game, and certainly he'll make everybody whole. Guys are going to be very pleased when all this shakes out. We've already had the promises before, or at least we've heard the promises to the PGA Tour players. They haven't panned out. Are the PGA Tour players going to believe this now?
No, they shouldn't. If I'm the PGA Tour players, they thought that they were actually in charge of their own tour, and they're not. And if I'm them, it's weird that they should have to do this, but they need to unionize tomorrow. They need to unionize as a player. And even if they only get 65% participation in the union, the point is, if you get a high enough percentage participation with the right people involved, now they're probably not going to get Rahm. They're probably not going to get Rory. They might not get Scotty. But if they get just one of those top 10 players involved in there to start the thing off, if they get a Spieth in there, which they're not going to get Spieth, but if they get a Spieth in there, all of a sudden they get some real power when it comes to the table.
In terms of these big picture buzzwords of trust and so on and so forth, what was Jimmy's reason for not allowing the LIV golfers to play in the Seminole Pro-Am event?
It's got to be just control, like just the ability to show that I have influence over X, Y, and Z. Flexing his nuts, trying to act like I have the ability to, keep you guys away from opportunities. Because the Seminole event, like I said, when you get a bunch of high value or high name golfers at Pro-Am events, it ends up becoming more of a business meet and greet than it does become a golf event. It becomes a who's who of Fortune 500 companies, of opportunities, of sponsors, influencers, people that you can meet, opportunities that you have available to you. And when that happens, it gets very wishy-washy and kind of tricky. And so my thought is that whole Seminole thing was really just a way to kind of blackball LIV players out of their own investment opportunities.
To me, it's so interesting that Jimmy Dunne has this 9/11 story.
Every day, the first thing I think about is that. Several times during the day, I think about it. And the last thing I think about at night is that. That has not changed since that day.
Is it basically 9/11 wash Jay Monahan's 9/11 co-opting story?
While the U.S. government does not officially pin 9/11 on the Saudi government, as you know, 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi Arabian. There have been investigations into potential links. You said last year you wouldn't be the fairest judge of Saudi involvement in golf because of how many of your coworkers died in the Twin Towers on 9/11. Has your opinion changed there?
Yeah. And, to me, this sounds like complete BS. I have a really hard time believing that this is actually a real story. This just sounds like something that is just being put out there or altered enough to be put out there to where Dunne has a way to appease the 9/11 families out there, which are, involved as saying, we don't want this in our sports. It's just strange.
In that Golf Channel interview where Jimmy Dunne is first revealed to the public and at length, toward the end of it, he's basically crying and breaking down, and he has his face on the desk. And then he says something along the lines, if anyone has irrefutable proof that any of these guys were involved in 9/11, he would kill them himself.
Yes. Which when we're talking about him being methed up or, you know, a crackpot or a cuckoo or whatever, this is what we're talking about. This is on national television live, and you're talking about potentially killing your own business partners, the people that you're supposed to have reached out to yourself in good faith, someone that you initiated the conversation with. All of those looks are not right for a congruent, peaceful argument of merging of businesses. This is why that particular quote is why we know who he is, even as a common person, and also why it's so weird, strange, and very deranged that this guy is actively involved in anything.
Folks, if you've appreciated the very golden-voiced Jake Spann Golf, you can listen to him at 54 Live, where he co-hosts the show with Digsies. That's another story. I'm not going to get into that. Also, you can find him on Twitter right there. And subscribe, share, and like, folks, because we got more rolling news stories coming in every second. It's going to be insane.
What we believe and what I believe will tell you, I believe that the PGA Tour is the best run organization and is the premier tour in the world.